So I'm going to start by showing, I think, a slightly updated version of something which Bill already showed earlier this week. This is a world map of average download speeds. And you can see that there are some green areas and some brown areas. And I guess it should come as no surprise to us that the brown areas a lot of Africa is brown and grey, which means they didn't get any data at all for those countries. So you can assume that the internet service is probably not that great in those places either. So it's a real issue in Africa with slow internet connections. And here are some of the effects of low bandwidth. I guess I'm preaching to the converted. If you don't have good internet, you already know the kind of effects that it can have, the negative effects that it can have on your work and on your organization. So these reasons here, this is a large part of the rationale why in SIL and Wycliffe we are trying to prioritize helping people to get better internet connections and enabling them to do more with the internet that they already have. So this is the bit that we've sort of had already. You know, getting the best from your ISP, telling them when things don't work, checking the speed of your connection regularly, so speedtest.net or other services, so that you can go back to your ISP and say, okay, it says on the contract that you're providing us with this speed, and actually we're getting that speed. You know, please can you explain that you're having some problems? So comparing prices, these are the figures that we had in Nigeria, 2014. You see we're paying $800 for 1 megabit. 2017, we're paying $600 for 5 megabits. So things are getting better. Part of that is because things are just improving slowly but surely. Part of it, I think, is because we were nagging our ISP and saying, hey, why are you giving us this when I can get this from another provider? This kind of better deal or cheaper deal. So yeah, that's part of the way of getting a good deal for your internet connection. I would advocate being a bit of a nuisance with your ISP. Not that you have a bad relationship with them, but try and be that squeaky wheel. We have a saying in English: the squeaky wheel is the one that gets the grease. So the customer who never complains, the customer who never phones up when the connection goes down, is going to be a low priority for your ISP. They're not going to bother whether they have a good connection or not because they're getting money from them and they never complain about it. But if you can become the squeaky wheel, the one who has a reputation in your ISP's office, and you phone up and they say, oh no, not that one again, then it can actually benefit you and it can help you to get a better deal. So there's one other aspect of this that I think we've touched on in some other sessions here, and that is our traditional model, and I guess for many organizations, the traditional way that you get internet in your offices is to have everything centralized. So in the left column, I've put the advantages and disadvantages of a centralized connection. That means that you have an ISP that you plug into your firewall or your router, and that goes to your whole network or to a part of your network with several users, sometimes even several hundred users. So you have one internet bill, so one bill to pay. In that sense, it's easy to manage. You can centralize all of your filtering and anything that you want to control on that internet connection. Disadvantage can be that to users, it's just another resource. And you may go around the office and find users listening to online radio, playing videos, and doing all kinds of other things that are actually slowing down the connection for others. And sometimes it just doesn't compute to the users that what I do with the internet connection is affecting the guy in the next office that is actually too slow for him to do his email, perhaps. So that's some of the issues with a centralized connection. So what we've started doing in SIL is we've started thinking about how about having a decentralized connection? How about handing out modems to users and getting them to connect through the modem? And in some cases, it seems that that actually can get a faster and a more reliable connection. But it also has its advantages and disadvantages. You might consider it an advantage that the user can budget their own usage. So if you put the responsibility in the user's hands and you give them a chunk of money every month and you say, okay, this is for your internet use. And they know that if they get through that in 1 week, then they're going to have no more internet for the rest of the month. And that can be a good thing if you're trying to teach stewardship of the resources. It can be a bad thing because then they will come back to you and they will ask you for more money and you have to get it approved with the management and it can become a headache. Of course, that means the connection can be available anywhere or anywhere that you can get the 3G or 4G service. It's also open to abuse. Where's the content filtering system if you have a user who's using a modem? It can prove a temptation, which for some can be hard to resist. So there are ways to get around that, which again give extra administrative headache. You can get filters that can be installed on individual computers, but it all has to be maintained by the IT guy. So it's not like one solution can fit all. It's a different kind of solution which may suit different places, some places more than others. So that's something to think about. So I want to open up a bit of discussion about this, specifically on this topic of whether to have a centralized internet connection that everybody connects to, or to have it decentralized with users or a user or a small group of users with their own modem. I'd like to ask, what kind of experience have you had with this in your organisation? Have you tried out this decentralised approach, and how did it go? Mark will be taking notes, by the way. Yeah, Emmanuel.
In SI Cameroon, we have a wide range of opinions there, and we tried to centralize before. Right now, we still use it in office work, but many people are not happy because many connect and we slow down the connection with personal stuff, like you just said before. So we encourage others to get their personal modems and pay their own bills for work, so all not to the work network. So supplying the residences, now we do not control so much that part. So because individuals have their own internet access.
Okay.
So the centralized part, we open it a bit. There's still a problem of problems coming from abuse. Now it is not outside being abused, so just like when they see the free high-speed connection at home, come to the office and it's slow, blame our system. And one thing I'd like to talk about that is there are times that the speed is not because the ISP is slow or whatever we get. It may be poor old equipment, faulty equipment that may really slow down the whole system. And also it may be poor power, grounding issues that cause voltage difference between different switch locations too. That may affect the whole switch of internet connection.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else with any comments on that? Paul?
Actually, to follow on, I visited Cameroon in January, and Emmanuel gave me a pass for the work network, but I found that I could get a local one that was quite good speed, and I didn't have to share it with anybody else. So I say that things have improved in Cameroon. When I left, that wasn't really a possibility of being oversold, and it was slow and so on. So two things there. One, things change over time, so you need to recheck these things. And two, if you can get people off. I actually had a colleague say, I can go down to the local internet and get faster speed? Why can't we get it here in the office? And I said, how many people are normally in an internet cafe? 10 maybe. How many devices we've got on our network? In the region of 90 to 120 users. So, I mean, that gives you an idea that if you can decentralise, it is an advantage, but then you've got other considerations. Like everything, what set of problems would you like to have?
Yes. Yeah, very good point. Thank you. Anybody else on this same topic? Maybe somebody from outside Wycliffe and SIR, one of the ICCM people. If you have anything to go on.
Thank you. In Khartoum, we have 4 internet service providers, and after checking them, we are using 2 of them, and one of them we are using it for centralized connection, just the router and the firewall. So that's in the office. But for some who are working with us, sometimes they need a good connection to connect so that they can do some consulting, checking through Skype, others. So we have provided them with modems and connected to a different service provider, so that, you know, in Sudan it fluctuates. When one service provider is bad, the other one is good. So we chose 2, so that if this one is not working well, the other one just, you know, works well, and then they can continue to work. It's working pretty fine.
Okay. Okay, so Steve, what you had your hand up?
One additional possibility can kind of do both. I mean, we have a centralized connection, but then I also have a little MiFi brick on that I keep on my desk, and I keep a small bundle on it every month. And then if there's a meeting at a building where we don't have at a neighbor's place, or somebody's taking a meeting home, or across the street to another place where we don't have a connection, they can take this brick along and have a little meeting. 3 computers can connect to it. So it just gives us some additional flexibility.
So your question was about, does anyone use either one, or what are you using in your office, right? So the centralized or the decentralized, is that right?
Yeah, especially if you have decentralized and if you come across issues and how you resolve those issues.
Well, I can't say much about how we resolve the issues yet, but so we have kind of an automatic failover, or it's kind of a manual failover, but it happens. As soon as the centralized internet doesn't work anymore, suddenly you see people popping online with a USB data connection things. And well, from a management point of view, what I'm trying to do is, or what I want to start doing is as well see, okay, how do we organize that? So is there some kind of reimbursement, or so do people, because some people are connected, other people are not, so how does that work? So I don't have any answers on that, but I would like to, I think the idea is great that people start connecting anyway, so they just plug in their own USB sticks and continue to work. But yeah, I do like to structure it a bit more so that people have the ability, so that everyone has the ability to do so. But yeah, I think it probably depends a bit on the size of your office as well. So in some places we have only 2 people or 3 people sitting there. So it's much easier to say, well, if it doesn't work, so here you have you all get your own key, and they're traveling a lot as well. So then it's probably not even worth investing in a centralized management, filtering, and that kind of stuff. But so that's just some things that we are looking to get into. So for bigger offices, I think centralized office solution is probably better. But if you only have 2 or 3 people, then yeah, the decentralized will probably work better.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So one thing I touched on just now is that when you have a decentralized solution, you don't have any kind of content filtering in place, or also it lacks the blocking that you would have on a centralized firewall, that you can block certain types of malware and different things. Is there anyone who has a good solution for dealing with that kind of issue, to be able to somehow do good content filtering on a decentralized connection?
So we've deployed Sophos endpoint protection, and the nice thing of Sophos endpoint protection is it's not just a firewall, or a antivirus product, but it also allows you to do endpoint content filtering. So the nice thing of that is that you have that you log into the central cloud, so the management console of Sophos, then you can push policies to endpoints. So it doesn't matter if they are behind like an Office network, so you really push the configuration to the client itself. So that's in this case, so you can limit that, you can also block certain websites, also schedule certain things to, like for example, Facebook between work times is not possible, so you can configure that on the endpoint itself. So that would be in a decentralized solution, but still like a decentralized internet solution, and this would still work.
What was that software called again?
So
Sophos endpoint protection.
Can I ask how much approximately are you paying for that? I remember you mentioning you got a non-profit discount. How much is it working out per client per year?
Yeah, because we so it's within our organization, it's a central optional service, which means that it's purchased through our global organization, and because of that, I think we had like over 1,000 licenses, and we were giving approximately, I think we're paying $6 per user per year, something like that.
Right.
So, or
Okay.
something like that. So it turned out pretty cheap. So if you look at the list price, it's like incredibly expensive, but something along those lines is what I remember. But I can confirm the pricing if you want to.
Okay.
So, but obviously the bigger amount that you get, the higher discount you get. So we actually tested 3 enterprise products earlier this year. So Webroot, Sophos, and Bitdefender. And so the Webroot was the cheapest. The Bitdefender, in the end, we got from Sophos, we got a better deal, and we got for Bitdefender.
Right.
But it's, yeah, so the more you buy, the bigger the discount. But yeah, talk with a supplier that knows you as well.
I can see Marcelo lurking there. I wonder if he wants to make a point.
Let Andy comment to that. I think he's got some
Okay.
interesting info on that.
Much of what Marcel is hinting at there, we do use Sophos and some of the endpoint capability as well. It's great. Even from a local management point of view, it's great to like the state of all the machines. And yeah, it just works well, and it's very reliable, and it's one of those things you just set up and let it go. So I'm very happy with it.
Looking at pricing, I know I spoke to Joachim too. I like his pricing, but I asked for something similar, and with the quantity of users I was looking at 50 or 60 users, and when I asked for a quote in Germany, the cost was about 50 euros for 3 years, which is still substantially less than what you would pay when you buy it outright in their store. But again, this is where the quantity really matters.
Yeah, but also the negotiations, there's definitely some price negotiation, they were willing to go down quite a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, we also have that product for antivirus. I wasn't actually aware that it had significant content filter capability, and I'd like to know if anybody's actually deployed the content filter piece successfully, just knowing about it.
Is that something you've actually deployed, Joachim?
Well, to be honest, I personally myself, I don't use it because I don't believe in web filtering. But I know that some of my colleagues they're doing that, and but what I'm afraid of is it's just creating a lot of support calls as well. And I just want to start with the basic first. But maybe in the future, if there's a specific need for it, that I at least can start using it. But I know that there are a number of users that are or IT people within our organization that are using it successfully. But yeah, there's definitely a support overhead that comes with it as well. But like with any filtering that you do.
Okay.
Just looking, one of the other bit more basic filtering is if you use OpenDNS, they do quite a lot of filtering and actually catch things like malware sites reporting back to their controllers. So it's quite good at filtering out that sort of information with pretty much no overhead at all. There are ways around it if you want to get around it, but it protects you, so why would you?
It can also be an issue when you have decentralized connections. It's easy to set up on a central network to use OpenDNS, but when you have people using modems, it's much harder, isn't it?
Just one more thing about negotiating. If you have an antivirus solution, every single company, if you want to move to a different vendor, that new vendor will always give you what they call a cross-update. So if your old subscription is still running, even if it's only for another 14 days, they will give you a hefty discount because you're switching to a new company. So
I mean, the original provider, if you go to them and
yeah,
say, hey, I'm
if you
switching.
say you have an AVG subscription, oops, I shouldn't have said that. Say you have an AVG subscription that you still have, and you have another 3 months left on it. If you go to Sophos and say, look, I still have this old subscription here, and I need pricing based on moving away from that product and going to the next. They'll discount you sometimes up to 70 or 80% for the first 3-year period. So that's something to consider when if you want to use a new piece of software and you don't want to stick with what you have, then do it before your subscription expires because they'll give you a very good discount.
Okay, so it's like a disloyalty discount.
That's right. Yeah, you're distributing something that they don't really want to see happen.
Yeah. Okay, good. That's good advice. Thank you. Does anybody have any other products apart from Sophos to recommend for any kind of content filtering or firewalling?
ESET does the same thing,
Okay.
but not on the products that you're currently buying. Not the internet security package. You have to buy the business package, and then you get a central management console, either online, or you can deploy one locally if you'd like to. And they have a lot of different options available within their software package.
Okay. Okay, cool.
It's a separate software package solely for content filtering, but it's called Covenant Eyes. I've seen that around.
Oh, but does it actually do filtering, or does it just send a list of your web history to your partner?
It's a while since I've actually been involved with somebody using it, but I think it does both. I could be wrong.
Okay.
I'm fairly sure it does stop, but I could be wrong on that. It's a while since I've touched it.
It's just recording.
It's just recording.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, Kyle?
Hang on 1 second.
We had used Covenant Eyes in the past when we removed it. It wasn't that it wasn't an effective filter, but the way that it was effective in filtering is by making your computer unable to connect to anything. So it became the default answer to why is my computer not working? So we decided to go with something else.
Right.
There was just a lot of problems in the way that Covenant Eyes puts itself as its own driver in your network stack. So it just causes all kinds of problems. So in theory, it's a good idea, but all it does is report back what you've done. It doesn't actually filter anything. So from a security point of view, if you're trying to keep people from going to sites that may have malware or anything, it doesn't prevent any traffic, it just blocks.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
Hello IT, have you turned it off and on again? Okay, hang on. Just, Ruben, you're in the way. Thank you.
Now, just commenting.
Okay, that's good.
We were using eSets and we switched over to Bitdefender. Bitdefender has the same, if you buy the business solution, also has the content filter. In our environment though, we don't have control on all computers. The students work in and work out with their own laptops and all that. So we can't install those kinds of things. So what we end up doing is that there is a DNS filter on the Next Secure. The older one is free. The new one, I think, requires some subscription. So that's what we did. We switched everybody's DNS to the Next filter, and that filters content. And that's very important for us because we don't want students to go to.
Okay, thank you. So can we move on to something slightly different? Or sorry,
Can I let him finish? And he's the last one, so.
We actually use in smaller offices a consumer device called a Circle that works really well. That's done in partnership with Disney that does time limits, internet filtering, content filtering, lots of different things. And they have a new kind of endpoint product called Circle Go that will manage mobile devices on any network they connect to as well.
I remember, Brendan, you did a presentation about that in, I think it was last year's IT Connect. You had a BOF where you shared about that. So I think there should be some files related to that in the courses 2017 English folder, or maybe you can update the information there.
Yeah, and the website is just meetcircle.com.
Meet Circle.
Meetcircle.com.
Meet
Meet
Circle.
as in meet Circle.
Are you hungry?
And it's not something that would work for like a big office or big organization, but more scale.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let me move on to something related but different. So far we've been, we started off talking about external issues. So basically, how do you make sure you're getting the very best deal coming into your office? How do you maximize the bandwidth and minimize the money that you pay and all the rest of it? So that's one big topic. But the other one is related to the internal connection on your network. So basically, how do you maximize your use of the internet? How do you make sure that you're actually getting the best out of the internet that you're buying? So I want to touch on a couple of topics related to that. There are some people in the room who will recognize some of these comments because they're comments made when we asked people in last year's IT Connect conference, what kind of issues and problems are you experiencing in your organization? This was for SIL and Wycliffe people. And a recurring theme in the comments were things about controlling the internet connection and users doing things that they shouldn't, and connection being slow because of factors on the network. Yeah, a lot of it related to what users are doing with the connection. So I just want to address part of that, and I want to start off. You know, as IT people are, at least for myself, the default way that I think about solving the problem is, can we find a technical solution? Can we put some clever software or hardware which will help us to solve this problem? And that's my kind of natural way of thinking. So I want to start off by looking at the other side. This is the more human kind of side, because there are two sides of this issue. I think there's the people side and there's the technology side. So I want to just share some kind of principles for what I call bandwidth stewardship, like making the most of what you, the internet bandwidth that you have. So first of all, I would say involve the director. If you consider there's a problem in your branch with the way that people are using the internet, that it's not being made available for the core business purposes that it should be, then involve the director at an early stage. Try and get his or her support. Get him or her to understand the problem and to understand that probably actually we can do something about it. Not to solve it completely, but there may be some things we can do to improve it. And if he can see, or he or she can see the connection between the issues on the local network and the business purposes of the organisation, then there's a good chance you can win that person over to allow you to try to improve the situation on the local network. So the second thing I put up there is about user policies. Now I put on the NAS inside 2018 English Internet Services Management. I put a Word document with some sample policies. So they're from SIL Nigeria, which is part of my work. And just some kind of sample text to get you thinking about how you might, what kind of policies you might get your users to sign about internet use. And of course, somebody can sign something and then do the complete opposite to what they just agreed to do. But at least you can point them back at it and say, well, actually, yes, I do have a problem with the way that you're watching lots of YouTube videos because you signed a policy that said that your internet use will not infringe on other people's ability to use the internet for business. So it's something that you can point back to. Also, I would say the policies should be formulated in a way that they reflect the core business needs, so prioritizing the internet use for the things that people really, really need to do, like email, for example, in most of our cases. And also they should be realistic and enforceable. So you should have specific policies. Like, for example, in Nigeria Group, we have a policy that says if you need to download a file during business hours, you can download things that will take no more than 10 minutes to download. If it's going to take more than 10 minutes to download, or if you start downloading it and you see it's going to take more than 10 minutes, then please don't download it during working hours. Wait until after 4 p.m. or send an email to me and I will download it overnight and put it on the network for you by the morning. So you can have things like that which make it very, very clear to your users what they should do and what they shouldn't do and when. So obviously trying not to make it overcomplicated. One other thing that I would recommend is restricting use of certain software. There may be people in your organization who need to use Dropbox, for example, but probably not every single person. Many users who actually use a program like Dropbox to synchronize files, they may not even realize how much bandwidth is taking up in the background, or they may have it set up so that they're synchronizing files that they really don't even need to synchronize. So that can be one issue. So I would recommend having a policy that restricts the use of certain software like that. Another thing, I'll give an example. My wife and I are having struggles sometimes with our children. I have twins, 11 years old. They wanted smartphones for Christmas. All their friends have smartphones and we're the bad parents because we didn't buy them smartphones. So finally we relented and we gave them our own used smartphones before Christmas. One of the things my wife keeps telling me is, I want the twins to think that you know everything that they're doing online. I want them to think that you can see everything and you can check everything. Of course, I can see and check quite a bit when I log in using their email account. I can see the YouTube history and different things. But it can be good for your users to think that you are somehow, you have the ability to check everything that they're doing online. We know that it's only partly true. you can check some things, you can find out some things, but not everything. But in a sense, your users should have, I hesitate to say it, but a healthy fear of the IT department, or a respect, rather, of the IT department that you can actually find out how the internet has been being used. I just want to ask again, discussion time, has this reminded you of any particular thing that you have in your organization, something you'd like to share related to this, Marcel?
I think what I'm seeing here is a great list of things. I've noticed that the first one for me has always been to educate the users. I had a user many years ago. When I looked through the logs, I was able to see that he had uploaded a lot of pictures to Yahoo at that time, a nice picture sharing service. And I went and spoke to this person, and the person said, no, I didn't do anything. He said, well, I can show you that you did. And that was what you said about the fear of the IT department. I think the danger is that people are then starting to be afraid of doing anything at all. So, first point for me is educate the users and just tell them in a nice way before you go to the director. But if you have bandwidth hogging, like you're in a low bandwidth situation and you have a lot of users doing it, then yeah, definitely it needs to come from top to bottom. But the first thing I think is to ask and is to talk to the users before you talk to anyone else, because it's like with anything. Bill, I don't like what you're saying, but I should go to you first and tell you personally, Bill, I just don't like what you're saying, instead of telling everyone here, hey, look at Bill, you know? So I know you're looking at me, so I figured that was a good way to just take this point. So anyway, my first thing is to speak to the users, because it helps to mitigate the situation. If you have to speak to 5 users in one day, then great. If that doesn't help, then get others involved.
Okay, yeah, Andy?
Andy first.
Yeah, we had an instance back at our old centre a few years ago. Our bandwidth would be absolutely hammered, and we tracked it down fairly quickly to one particular MAC address, and we blocked that MAC address, and all of a sudden it popped up somewhere else with a different MAC address. And this person made about 3 or 4 changes of MAC address, and I'm not sure what he was using to spoof his address, or he was using a different machine or whatever. And we eventually had to actually capture some of the files that were being transmitted, and it turned out it was some new child, the baby just being born, and the pictures were being uploaded to grandparents in vast quantity in Korea, which, because of the people we knew we had on site, limited it to one particular individual, so we went and knocked on the door and had a little chat. And for which he was very apologetic. We complimented him on his inventiveness in trying to get around the filters, but suggested it wasn't the appropriate thing to do. He totally understood. I hadn't realised what the situation was, so I would suggest that quite a lot of users have no idea about bandwidth or how much bandwidth what they're doing is using. Yeah. So a bit of a softly educational approach often works wonders.
Thank you.
Yeah, I loved what you said, Richard, on the just the practical policy. So I'm hoping for more, like the one you mentioned. If the download of personal stuff takes longer than half an hour, please cancel it. I think that's very concrete, and people can understand. You can educate them in that. So I think I'd love to think of more of those examples. But yeah, I agree with you that those kind of policies and standards would help a lot. Also, what I think what Marcelo shared, I think is what I wanted to add as well, is that you don't want to be in a situation where people feel insecure using IT systems. So I think particularly in our organization as well, where their privacy, like personal contact with partners and stuff is very important. So you have to be very sensitive there. But at the same time, I also think there is a risk in IT department becoming the police of the internet, and that's why I like what you write there as well. Involve the director and let it be a director for HR thing as well. So the role of the IT department really is facilitate technology and make sure that it keeps working. Obviously, I think, well, depends per organization and probably the the senior level of the IT person as well, that you can walk up to certain people. But I'd be hesitant to say, okay, you now need to confront people with certain things. So it's a thing. It's different for every context, but thanks for the information.
Yeah, you need a balance really, and it's hard sometimes to get that balance.
And the thing is, it's like Jochen was saying, it's not the IT department that makes the decisions. It has to be leadership making broad decisions that imply for the whole organization as such, or for your location where you are. We've gotten accustomed to being the boss, and that's not the case. We're not the bosses, we're the custodians, and our directors make the decisions. We have to let them make the decisions, and we get input. We hopefully are able to give input, but the decision is ultimately not ours, because there's other people who are responsible for the whole system and such.
Okay, last comment probably from friends.
Okay, I really like the idea of educating users about the impact of the internet use. This is something that cannot just happen once. It's supposed to be ongoing. I have a guy in our office. One day he came to me and told me that now he understands the importance of what we have been doing. Apparently, he had his own modem, and then he subscribed to get like 1 gigabyte per day, and that was enough for him. And then they had a workshop, and he shared with another person, and he realized that his bundles will just disappear. And this kept happening, and then he realized the importance of what I was explaining to him. And then he came to me and said that this was really helpful. So sometimes they don't even have a good understanding of what it really means until they reach a point like that.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important to assume the best of people. You know, even if their computer is sucking half of your bandwidth, don't start off by assuming that they're doing it deliberately, because it's often not actually the case.
Yes, assume goodwill is a very good thing. The other side of it is, and I don't want to sound spoiled, but we all decompress, we all need to laugh, we all need diversions, and if there were a way to make compromises where we locally downloaded funny videos, locally downloaded some pictures, and made low bandwidth alternative to decompressing and having some things, maybe that could be something to look into.
Okay, thank you for that. Let me just move on to, let me just mention one small thing. It's helpful, I put this here because you can use some kind of practical illustration like a tank of water and the use of different taps around your house which empty the tank. If the user doesn't really understand that their internet use is impacting everybody else's internet, then you can use some kind of simple illustrations like that to bring home the point and to make it clear that bandwidth is a finite resource. Somebody could bring me a glass of water though. Yes.
We don't have any water here, that's the problem.
Yes. So.
It's all been used.
Okay. Another thing I want to touch on is technical solutions. So moving from human solutions to technical solutions. I want to hear about how, whether in your organization you have found a good way to isolate who is actually using the bandwidth and what they're using it for. Whether you actually have a good way to monitor your internet connection. There's one product called NTO PNG, which we've been using in Asao, Nigeria. Unfortunately, we had some technical issues with our switch that mean that we're not actually using it at the moment. But that's one product that we found is reasonably easy to use, and you can actually show by user or by type of traffic, and with a little bit of training, you can find out how to how to discover who is actually using all the bandwidth. But I wonder, does anybody else use this, or do you prefer the Unify controller, or what are the really good ways of monitoring bandwidth?
Richard, again, why is that not working for you, this one?
Well, unfortunately, NTO PNG, it needs to be set up in a way that the machine that it's running on needs to receive all the internet traffic. So we had a switch which had port mirroring set up to do that. That switch has since caused some networking issues and ended up being replaced by a different switch. And we haven't really got to the bottom of the problems with that. So yeah, that's unfortunate, but I would definitely recommend this NTO PNG.
We have one way that, or something we've done the last year, actually thanks to Mesfin's advice from last year, we looked into, and we switched over to pfSense this last year. The thing that we weren't getting with IP Fire that we could do with pfSense is add a couple rules to the firewall. Basically, I'm not figuring out what people are doing with the bandwidth, but per LAN IP address, we're limiting your total throughput, to, internet throughput, to say, let's say like about 10% of total. I mean, it's a relatively small network. So what I mean is each client, we have a 4 megabit connection download, but each client is only allowed 512. Each SIL work-related client. All the Android phones are locked down to 128 kbps. So the only reason we can do that, we identify when they join the HCP, and then we'll reassign them to a different part of the IP range, and we have the rules that are based on those ranges. So basically, the reason we were looking at something like that is with either Windows updates or other things that were just really saturating the network from unknowing users. It often wasn't malicious, but it was just really throttling the network. So we kind of gave up trying to smartly balance different types of traffic and just instead are balancing based on, we don't care what you're doing with your bandwidth, that's all you've got, and it then leaves it free for the rest of us.
So you,
Okay.
so this is just a firewall. This is just a firewall rule.
Firewall rule that is able to be applied to a LAN IP address or range.
It's actually a, bandwidth, under the bandwidth management. You could do that under bandwidth management, Steve.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is a caveat to that though. In your bandwidth situation, fully understandably, but if you have people who need to have conversations, VoIP or spec related, that will sometimes be a big barrier because they won't be able to use the bandwidth for anything else, just for that, because of the quantity of bandwidth that's needed to actually establish audio and video.
So in some cases, maybe a combination of solutions can be good. So you can have your centralized network with a speed locked down like that, and then have modems that you distribute with SIM cards that have been topped up for people who need to use Skype. It depends on the circumstances.
We use NTOP MG. pfSense has a plugin for NTOP MG. So if you add that plugin, it will show you all sorts of graphs per IP, per traffic, which application, and very detailed traffic analysis. The thing to watch out for though is it can, if you don't watch out the disk space, it can quickly fill up your disk space, and pfSense crashes.
Ah, okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because it logs everything. You set up a rotation. You rotate your logs every so often. Chinipo, you were going to say something, but the thing about limiting the bandwidth is one of the things that can happen depending on how it's set up. You might also be limiting the bandwidth that they're allowed to have internally on your network. So you need to see how that gets set up so that people can still use the maximum bandwidth internally, because they might be uploading a 2 gig file to your NAS or to whatever location you have for a file server. And that needs to be really well thought through. If not, then your users are going to be very unhappy.
I think if we let people do the policing themselves, that can help us to. We are Christians and we want to better serve or use our resources well. If there is a software monitoring system that is not like that logo, that will be on the top side of your screen. And if whatever it is, most of the time that updates are going on in the background that the users do not know. What if we have a software that can just be showing, if it goes above a certain limit, it shows red, it signals the user that your computer is doing something. That way they can tell us, they can help us that something is happening. And if they themselves are doing something, it may also remind them that you are above the limit. I don't know if something is like that we can apply.
Great idea, but the implementation is going to be a nightmare. So it's not easy to do because it means there's got to be an active, something active has to happen, but do the research. Tell us next year.
I'd like to ask Kyle. Kyle came to me a couple of days ago and said there's something strange with the traffic from the Synology. There's some BitTorrent traffic, which was actually my fault because I have a BitTorrent client running on there for business purposes, not for downloading movies. But I'd just like to ask Kyle, how was he able to find that out? What tool did you use?
Well, from past experiences, the firewall here has a limited number of sessions that it allows from just because of the amount of memory and CPU. So a practice that I've gotten into is if the internet is being slow, I do a report on the Zywall that says how many sessions are assigned to any IP address on the network. I noticed one IP address was sending 300 KB packets to over 300 addresses across the internet, and they were all seemingly random. And that usually means to me torrent or virus. So it wasn't anything specific that said there was torrent or not. It was just, it looked suspicious, and we figured out what device it was and found the person, and I talked to you about it and figured that out. So.
Okay, thank you.
I think one thing just also to mention is that you don't always get by with one tool to do this. You sometimes need multiple tools to find something that's causing problems because not one tool actually does everything because we all have a different concept of what we think we need. So, Justin, did you just want to say something?
Okay, I'll move on to the last slide if we don't have any more comments. So, still looking at bandwidth stewardship, this is something fairly obvious. WSUS can be a big help in downloading Windows updates just once instead of each computer downloading their own. Even though you can set Windows 10 to share downloads on the local network, if you have the capacity to administer WSUS, and it does take some administration to approve updates and different things, then that is a recommended solution. There's a system called Langtran, which I've shared about in previous IT Connect conferences. It's actually a software repository, which means that it makes it easy to set up a system which can download updated versions of software overnight according to which kind of software you want. So we have groups for linguistic software, for non-linguistic software, for example browsers, and different things that, that people periodically need to update their installations of. It's especially useful when you need to set up a new computer with the latest versions of different software that users need. So you can follow the link, which is on the PowerPoint, which is not yet on the NAS. So I'll put the PowerPoint on the NAS straight after the presentation, and you can find out more about Langtran. If you have a problem with that.
What about the non-power users? Are they just out of the lecture?
Which non-power users?
Your power users, right?
Aha.
What about the non-power users?
Well,
They need help.
Yeah. Well, what I mean is mainly, you know, we can probably all think of certain users that we support who are capable of installing their own programs and configuring them and different things. most of our users maybe are not even bothered which version of which program they have. They're maybe not particularly technical. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, we all have different kinds of users. But what I would advocate with Langtran is using it to download installers overnight and have them in a shared folder on your server, which is read-only for most users, and just make it available to your users and tell the users about it. That's what we have in Nigeria. So I don't know whether Jay has any comment about that, whether that's being helpful or how is that system working?
Yeah, for it, I think it has been serving us well. We have not ever had any issues with it. So many people do go there and get it from there. Once the download is ready, they'll fetch it from there. So it has been serving us well.
Okay. So, and then another fairly obvious point about restricting internet use on the firewall, timed blocking, content filtering, blocking certain apps. I understand that's possible with Zywall to actually block, for example, so you have most users cannot connect to the internet with the Dropbox program. That's possible to set up, although I don't know how to do it yet. And giving users different access levels. So you may have a group of users that you determine, or that the director determines should be able to do Skype during work time, and you give them a different level of access to other users who don't need to do that as part of their work.
I think one of the key things to remember is that doing all of this is a lot of work. It's not just you set it and then it's done. It's set and forget it for a couple of days and then work on it again and again and again because things change. So the capacity has to be there to do that while you're doing all the other things. So I have had situations where I was working on something else that was causing issues within my local network, and all of a sudden the internet just went to a crawl. And I just said, you know what, I can't deal with that right now. We're gonna have to wait. And I got so many complaints, I actually just turned the internet off and said it's off right now, so nobody's getting anything. And I explained myself later, saying that my priorities had to shift, and that's why I had to do what I did. There was a lot of understanding, fortunately, from the people I was dealing with, but this is a high maintenance system in the long run, because you have to constantly maintain it. That's been my experience. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, but you need to do it, and you need to have someone else who can do it with you, if possible.
Thank you. Any other comments on this, or is there anything I've left out related to bandwidth stewardship? Jacques?
What I can add about WSVS is, yes, if you set up it in the network, people who come to connect to your network, the updates, Microsoft update, it's open. So how to prevent that? With Zywall, it's possible to avoid, to prevent any connection to Microsoft to receive the updates. So can help on that side.
Okay, so yeah, depending on if the users have got any other internet connection that they use, you might want to block Windows updates from coming through your firewall, especially if they have modems at home that they connect with.
Better remember though that WSUS is a service that you need a CAL for every user connecting to it. So it only works within a properly set up domain environment. You can't just connect a computer to it and get the updates, at least not legally. You can't do it, but legally you're not allowed to.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, it's a service you're accessing on a Microsoft server, and you need a client access license for each device connecting to it.
Tell that to Patrick Vanderbeek.
Well, that's on him, but that's why setting it up is it's easy, but it has to be done right, especially as the nature of us, we're believers. We should adhere to the laws that are given us. I'm not going to go more into that, but the thing you can do, what I've discovered, especially because Windows 10 updates are starting to become easier just on a network sharing level, you could have one Windows 10 computer running in the evening, if it's possible, in your work environment, using a rule of some kind that you block the update sites for Microsoft during the day and allow it to download them in the evening and at night when almost nobody's there. And then close it down again during the day, because then they can get their updates from this machine that has been updated. That's one option. That will work for 10, but it won't work for the other operating systems.
Yeah, and again, it requires tweaking and checking and making sure that settings are still what you want.
But that's one setting that you set and forget. Because you set it, you tell it from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., you can go to update.microsoft.com, and otherwise you can't. So, anyway, just a suggestion that might work in scenarios.
Okay, Jakob?
So I have a question. It's on the list that you have here. So have you considered caching proxies as well for bandwidth stewardship purposes?
Yes, that's something which we used to do with IPCOP and with IPFire. Unfortunately, since we stopped recommending those products, partly because IPCOP wasn't being maintained, we found IPFire has got stability issues for many of the people who've been using it. Unfortunately, Zywall doesn't have the caching capability. Paul has got a comment to make on that.
Okay.
We actually use another proxy to cache, but one of our biggest problems is that we don't have, we can't cache HTTPS.
That was exactly my question. Yeah, so
we have a lot of sites now that are HTTPS, yes. So I'm not sure what you can do about it. If anybody's got a solution, I'd love to know.
Well,
it's to update the firmware, because the new firmware for Zywall can
this is about a caching proxy server, so that means that it needs a hard drive to actually cache some of the frequently used websites that people behind the firewall have been used. But indeed, what you say, Paul, as well, was my observation, because most of the traffic these days is HTTPS. This is still Word, actually, the effort, because this book, the Sophos firewall, is allowing you to do a caching proxy server. But yes, with so many HTTPS websites, I mean, it's not really work properly. You can probably configure it to do HTTPS SSL offloading, which means that you configure a certificate on here, and then you have to configure like a certificate on all your computers as well. But that is very, it's just too much hassle almost. So I was wondering if anyone successfully is still using caching.
I'd like to make a comment related to that. I was doing some emailing a couple of days ago about an issue with a firewall in DR Congo in Isiro, and the question was whether, because the Zywall, no, let me back up. IPCOP and IPFire have got, sorry? Yeah, IPFire has got the capability to cache Windows updates. There's an add-on that you can put there which will cache automatically any Windows and Microsoft updates. And the question was, now that Zywall cannot do that, but Zywall is considered to be more stable and is our recommended firewall, is there any way that you can still benefit from IPFire's caching of Windows updates while still using Zywall? And Paul Z, who's known to some of the people in this room, JARS, he was saying that yes, it should be relatively easy. I think Justin also made a comment on that. It should be relatively easy to set up by having the internet connection come into the IPFire, and then the IPFire LAN side come into the Zywall, and then you would have the sort of the best of both worlds. I don't know whether I'd recommend that, but it is one way that you could set it up to benefit from that kind of caching.
we use the SSL offloading and proxying for our business traffic so that we can inspect the traffic for malware. It's a similar thing for caching. Setting up, you have to set up your own, SSL signing domain. Yeah, certificate authority. Thank you. And then sign a certificate and push that out to your machines. If all of your computers are domain machines, you can do that through group policy. But if anybody doesn't have that set, they'll get an SSL error whenever they try to log into an SSL website. But it is possible to do through group policy and somewhat seamlessly. But for our business network, we have that turned on. For the guest network, since none of them are going to have our certificate, we don't scan that content for that. So it's only it's a specific solution for our use case, but not as a universal for caching.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
And again, I'm just going to remind you again that that could be a lot of work. So it's always a balance. Do you really want to do this because you might save yourself a little bit of bandwidth? Or do you just want to let the bandwidth be and get on with the other tasks that you need to be doing instead of maintaining yet another system?
That's very true. And of course, the more links you have in your chain, the more things that have to be working for everything to work smoothly, the more chance there is that one of them will actually stop working, and it will actually result in your network being less stable rather than more stable or more quick.